Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Built in California series. With me on the line is an innovator, a founder doing cool things, and lots to get into today. But he's in the medtech space, hardware. It's the hard things, of course. And so his name is Bill Colone, the founder and CEO of SinglePass. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. How's things in Orange County today?
It's a little chilly, but still beautiful and sunny, so it's a great place to be.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, it's like -3 where I am, so
We're gonna
so
have to. I think it's only gonna be 65 today, so we're gonna have to suffer.
yes, I know. And Thanksgiving around the corner, so yeah, great to have you here, man. So look, you're doing some interesting stuff, and and you're also at an interesting stage. So I'm very privileged to kind of have you here and to kind of hear more and connect what you guys are doing to my audience. So why don't you start, though, be appreciative from my side in the sense of like painting a little bit about your background, because you've done quite a few different things in the entrepreneurial space, and then give us the elevator pitch around SinglePass.
Sure. So I am an engineer by training, by educational training, and my entire career, now spanning over 40 years, has been developing and designing medical devices. But all the devices that I've designed and developed have always come from physician-inspired ideas, because I don't know what the clinicians need. So mostly I've worked with vascular surgeons and interventional radiologists. And once they come to me with a problem or my teams with a problem, we usually can figure out how to make either improved devices or new devices based on their clinical need.
Mm-hmm.
So over the course of years, probably done 15 or 20 devices, all the way from them being just a concept or an idea in a physician's brain, all the way to designing, developing, testing, getting regulatory approvals, and then launching them in the market. So the most recent product we have is SinglePass. This was the brainchild of two interventional radiologists from Phoenix, Arizona, who do a number of biopsy procedures every day, where they grab a tissue sample out of your liver, or kidneys, or lungs. And currently, they do not have anything that can prevent bleeding during these procedures. There's nothing technique-wise, or there's no device. So they had the clever idea of, could we possibly cauterize this tiny tissue channel before we pull out this guide needle after we grab our pathology tissue sample? So it's not that easy to do. These devices need to be small and fit into a very, very tiny guide needle. But they came up with a very clever idea that I then met these guys through an introduction, which is what always happens. And the group that I work with in Orange County, if we get physician-inspired ideas that we like, we then will form a company with the clinicians as co-founders. We will go raise money. And then we have a design and development team and a manufacturing team that we work with to put everything through its paces, from the initial design all the way through testing and regulatory approvals, and then market launch. So right now, SinglePass has an electrocautery device. It's technically a biopsy closure device to prevent any bleeding after they take these tissue samples from you. So folks can go home without worry of reintervention or without the need to stay in the hospital for a period of time. So we've already been in the clinic and treated about 30 patients. I've been in about a third of those procedures. The device is working beautifully. So we are very close to making both our regulatory submissions, and this should be available in the US by early Q2 to be used in the clinic.
Fantastic. So why don't you hit us with the elevator pitch on what's the issue here? So I recognize that this is really about, according to my understanding anyway, something called electrocautery. Am I saying that the right way?
Yeah, our solution is an electrocautery device. So the problem is when they suspect most likely cancer or some issue, and they say, hey, either in your kidney or liver or lungs, we need to poke a large needle through your skin and use ultrasound guidance until we reach the target tissue area. Then we reach through that needle and pull out a chunk of tissue that we give to the pathologist, and the pathologist will confirm, do you have cancer, or do you not have cancer, or do you have some other medical condition? And currently, after that procedure, all they do is literally pull the guide needle out and apply pressure at the skin level, even though these guide needles are stuck sometimes 4 or 5 inches deep into your body. Holding pressure at the skin doesn't prevent bleeding that's caused deep in the tissue. But all they can do right now is just apply pressure, put bandages on the patients, hope they don't bleed severely, or hope the bleeding that has been caused just stops by itself. If not, these people need to sometimes go to the hospital for open surgery to repair a hemorrhage or more minor procedures. So our electrocautery device essentially just heat seals the tissue. So if you started to bleed, it'll stop, or if you haven't bled at all, it'll prevent bleeding.
So, what would you say is the market opportunity in dollars that you guys are going after? How big
Oh,
is this
this
problem commercially?
easily a $2 billion global market, with about 40% of that being in the US. There are several million, 6 or 7 million biopsy procedures performed every year where the single pass device could have none.
Hmm. And we were talking before you went live. You were considering going or funding this startup through the public markets. Obviously, things have gone where they've gone, and you've decided not to do that. I'm just curious for our audience to understand: have you listed companies before on the Nasdaq? And if you have, like, why did you choose to float this business? Or, strategically, what's driving you to do public market funding as opposed to private?
Yeah, well, we've started the company with private funding. Previously, I was part of one other public offering. I was not the CEO. Um, my first startup was acquired by a private company that then used that acquisition to go public. So I was part of the roadshow. You got to see what paces he had to go through. I presented the technology that was acquired from my previous startup. So I got to experience the process. And this time around, we considered it because raising funding right now is difficult between what's happening with the war with Russia and Ukraine, rising interest rates, the crumbling stock market. It was tough to raise private funding, so we were approached by a handful of investment banks who said, "Hey, we think where you are strategically in a very large market, and you're very close to the finish line, you're close to regulatory approvals, you should consider the IPO process." So we kind of engaged, went back and forth a little bit, and then at the last moment, temporarily, we pulled out because we'd like the market conditions to improve. So we'll go back in January, February, and reevaluate whether we should go to the public markets. But it's been tough for IPOs lately. We're worried about the valuation being too low because the market's conditions are poor.
Hmm. So, who's on your team here? I mean, this is obviously something that's pretty hard to create, something as precision as what you guys have created. So, how have you gone about the process of innovation and building? Well, I know you came across this product, but what was the innovation process that you guys have used to create this type of innovation in the medtech area?
Yeah, I have 4 partners, and all of us are lifetime med device, um, mostly executives. Most of us are engineers, mostly R&D backgrounds. So we've developed, gosh, between the 4 of us, many devices. But collectively, there's over 100 years of experience doing medical device design and development. Collectively, we have over 150 issued patents on medical devices between the 5 of us. So this is a pretty solid technical team. And once we get a clever physician inspired idea and we can confirm that there's an unmet need in a large market, and it can be a solution that we can manufacture and sell with a profit, that is what we typically then will go to the series of investors that we know, that we've worked with before, that trust us, who put in the early seed funding. That gets us to a certain stage, and then always with the same plan. We do link up with one contract manufacturing company that's nearby, that's owned by a colleague of ours. So that company has the full development team. They have the technicians. They have a beautiful facility, and so we push everything through there. So it's a nice little funnel to evaluate many ideas that come from clinicians. I think we looked at over 200 ideas last year from clinicians, and we actually started 3 companies, with Single Pass being the first one that we started.
Hmm. So, how do you validate a need? Like, how do you know whether this is something that can scale or that's of real value in the market? Like, what's the process that you guys have used to quantify and or qualify whether this need is actually, or whether there's a gap in the market? Because oftentimes there's a market in the gap, but there's a gap in the market, but there might not be a market in the gap.
Yeah, completely understand. So usually the very first thing, it's physician interviews. So many times, we get these ideas literally 1 or 2 a week. And first thing we'll do, we'll go to the physician specialty that would potentially use the device, and we'll get feedback. Of course, the typical Google searches. There are a ton of market reports we can acquire as well. So we will purchase those to validate the market, look at potential competition. So it's all the standard steps to do that. And usually that market information is available quite readily. We can determine if there truly is an unmet need in a large and growing market. But then beyond that, really what we need before we'll go forward is patent protection. So we also take a very, very hard look at do the clinicians already have pending IP or issued patents? And we always seek a freedom to operate first because it's very, very valuable. So we'll check out the market size with the interviews and what we can find out through market reports that are available. But then we go straight to the IP to see if it's something we can protect.
And how do you go about protecting IP like this? I mean, how long is that process typically? What are the costs involved and that kind of thing? Because I would imagine that, well, I'm curious maybe to ask, how much copying is there? In other words, like, in terms of like you identify a gap in the market, let's just say, and there's a market in the gap. Like, I don't get the sense that medical innovation in terms of like major established companies is where it's at. So if you have this type of product already built, like you've got quite a long time before someone's even thinking about coming into the space to compete with you in that product. Do you know what I mean? Especially if you are creating a white space or you're innovating at a product level to create an opportunity that hasn't been, realized before.
Yeah, well, it's pretty simple. I mean, the IP, we have a very good patent attorney. And again, since we are so experienced in that, the very first thing we'll do, we'll call our patent attorney. They will search for similar ideas. They use keywords and key categories. They'll let us know what existing IP is out there. We then will reveal what the new concept or design is. They'll take a very hard look at that and tell us, hey, we think there's already something there that may be problematic. If not, if it looks like the new idea has freedom to operate or is what they call novel compared to what's in the public domain, we then immediately file provisional applications just to protect the original idea. Inevitably, through the design and development, we come up with more meaningful, patentable material. And then we'll do a series of patents both on the method of using the device and on the device design itself, which usually leads to a series of patents around the new technology that we then can, protect our idea. Getting the patents issued will take anywhere from 2 to 5 years, but a lot of times just having pending applications is adequate enough.
And is your plan to exit this? So to find an acquirer and exit it? Because I'm curious to maybe ask you, like, when are you thinking about an exit? Are you thinking about an exit already, before you've really like reached like a huge amount of scale? And what's your advice to founders around thinking about exiting?
We always think of exiting literally from the very first day. So there's a point of balancing risk and reward. So we understand that the large strategic companies like innovation from small startups like what we do, but they want risk removed. So usually they'd like to see clinical evidence that's very solid, that's performed by high-level key opinion leader physicians. And then really once you have regulatory approvals, most importantly in the US first, Europe second, that removes all the regulatory risk for them. Then they're more likely to make an acquisition. So although we are not quite there, we'll probably have regulatory approvals in Q2 of this upcoming year in both Europe and US. We've already had some initial talks with potential strategic partners, but most likely any deal would be pending regulatory approvals. So once we have regulatory approvals, that'll be the first true value spike. And then it ends up being a corporate decision. If you get an offer, hey, you simply have approval, you don't have much revenue yet, what are those dollars? Should you take it further and try to grow revenue and then get a new acquisition at a higher exit value at a multiple of revenue? But you start balancing risk and reward. If you can get out with a good return, We have had examples both ways where we've heard of folks that had a deal on the table, they turned it down to take it longer, and then they lost the deal.
Mm.
So you've got a balance, and there's usually a magic number where finally everybody says, "All right, that's good enough. Let's do the early exit," versus taking the risk of needing more financing to grow your revenue by hiring sales reps and taking it longer. So strategy is literally there's always forks in the road depending on what happens with how fast the product is used, how much uptake, how quickly your revenue grows, and that'll help guide the decision whether you should exit early or whether you take a longer ride.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good thing. You sound like an entrepreneur who builds and sells. Like you're an exitpreneur. You're kind of like me. like like
Yeah.
I'm also like, hey man, if I make $1 million, I'm not gonna sweat it if I could have made two. You know what I mean? It's like I'm making the million, so I'm using those numbers metaphorically. So because also I know like what type of founder I am. Like I don't want to grow like my last business had 55 people and I hated it because it was just like, yo, it's too big, man. Like I'm more like a visionary. Like there's a gap in the market. Let's build you a nice house. But then if you want a skyscraper, like please, you're welcome. Come build your skyscraper and I'll sell you the house. But I've got no interest in hanging on. You know what I'm saying, for like 10 years, 15 years, because to your point, things do change, markets do move, competitors do enter the space, and so you need to be. Or my experience has been, and I've lost a lot of money and lost a lot of opportunity because I wasn't clear about what type of entrepreneur I was. You know what I mean? Like there's one hit wonders, which they build a business by some kind of luck and then they hang on to it for 10, 15 years and maybe they sell it, but maybe they don't. And then you got the other guys within that same 10, 15-year period, they've sold two companies.
Right. Yeah, we are just like you. So since we are more developers, we don't have any big dreams about building a 500-person company and taking this for 10 years. We would rather safely hit a single or a double than to try to wait for the risk to hit a grand slam home run. So we have a parking lot of other ideas from physicians. We'd rather hit a single or a double, get a nice return, and then roll up and do the next one again. So we are, like you said, exitpreneurs. We do want to get these things to a finish line, get a nice return for our investors, and then do it again. So that's you would fit right in with the group of folks that we work with.
Well, that's so nice. When you're young, you spend your entire life trying to fit in, and then when you're older, you try and spend your entire life trying to stand out.
Yep.
That's classic. So curious, how do you know how much is enough? Like, I had this conversation with a client of mine in New York the other day, and in fact, like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, cool, well, I think my number's like $10 million because I reckon, I don't need more than that because, like
What do you mean? Do you mean individually or when to exit? How much to
no,
have in the
like,
bank yourself, or
yeah, like how much is enough to accept? Do you know what I'm saying? Because like, um, because especially in your space, I suppose, because you don't have revenue, you have a product. So then the acquirer, I would suggest, maybe you have some revenue, but it's largely you buying the product itself. So if you were to sell it to like a medical distribution company or maybe like some hospital network, something like that, they're essentially then either buying or valuing it on a cost saving, or maybe it's like some way that they could take the product and commercialize it globally or across the US.
right?
So they're looking at that opportunity versus like, well, what's the thing intrinsically worth? So that's the acquirer side. But what I'm asking you is, how do you decide? Like, is 10 million enough or like 3 million? You know what I mean? Like, how do you know, and how do you sleep at night
Yeah.
knowing that that's enough?
Well, it ends up being a board decision. There's five of us, and essentially, again, since we have all the details, right? We're insiders. We know exactly what potentially can go wrong. We can look at the market. We also can gauge the level of interest. I mean, if there's a small level of interest and there's one offer on the table, and maybe it's not fantastic, but we realize it's been tough to garner interest from strategics, probably take a lower number. The goal is always to get two interested partners. Then you can jack the number up, and then that always seems to be good enough. So, but again, we are okay with hitting singles and doubles and doing that multiple times as opposed to trying to jack it up to a higher value to hit a grand slam home run. But probably, as long as there's a multiple on the last investment round, as long as we can get a return for the investors. So those same folks will invest with us again. Then we're willing to seriously consider an offer.
Are you in a raise now?
Yeah, yeah, we're currently in a raise now.
Okay. I must connect you to a guy, a venture capitalist who runs a number of funds specifically for medtech hardware. I'll connect you to him. Chatting to him later, I'll mention you guys.
Great.
So, what I wanted to find out from you was in this idea of innovation and building products, developing products, and things like that. What would you say in the context of single pass has been your greatest failure, and what did you learn the uh, from the experience to date?
I think that the biggest failure is we didn't initially realize how gigantic the opportunity was. So I think we underestimated, and it really took until we got our product designed and developed and did the first clinical cases and saw the incredible reaction from the clinicians for this is better than I thought it would be. We'd like to now think of more uses. The other thing we were told by the inventing clinicians that, these are minor procedures, these are only 20-minute procedures, but the patients have anxiety because they're told they may have issues afterwards, and the clinicians have anxiety. They're like, this should only last 20 minutes, but if there's a bleed, or if I send the patient to the recovery room and they have an issue, this ends up turning into a hospital admission, potential surgery. It's the simple procedure can lead to a lot of bad stuff. So when we were doing the initial procedures and we were told the clinicians want to be very conservative, I'm not going to try the tougher cases because I don't know how this is going to work. And when they saw how incredible it worked and how clearly it worked and how they could confirm under ultrasound that, yeah, we are truly cauterizing the channel, all these concerns I had have gone away. And also seeing the relief on the patients, because I'm in the room watching the procedures. The patients are awake. They may be mildly sedated, but they're aware of what's going on. And when the doctor tells them, "Hey, there's no bleeding," and we confirm that that everything is cauterized, there's this instant there that I think we underestimated how clever of an idea this was and how much of a clinical impact it could have.
Mm. How does it make you feel then? Because I mean, it must be quite interesting, right? Isn't it? Because I'm talking about in your context, because you're literally standing in the friggin' room, like going, "Hey,
Yeah.
like this person's being cut open, sort of sedated but awake and lucid," and then you're going, "Holy shit, this is like your product's
This,
like going into some human being." You know what I mean? It's not like it's
yeah.
like a digital marketing subscription where you can just turn it off if
Right.
shit goes south. You know what I mean?
Yeah, those people are gutless. They don't do anything special. So it's I've done a lot of implant devices that are life-saving devices, and I taught those clinically, so I'd be in the room. So those were much more nerve-wracking. But I remember the first case, we had the R&D team there. I said, look, if things go totally wrong and there's bleeding and nothing stops, don't change the expression on your face. If things go incredibly well, don't change the expression on your face. So the feeling though is incredible relief. Like this thing worked. The very first procedure, and then we did. Remember when we were in Europe, we did 8 procedures in the first 4 days, and all of them were the same beautiful result. It was just tremendous relief because it's all theoretical until you start touching patients.
Yeah, it's all theoretical until you start like cutting them open and your product's working inside them. It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
from a regulation perspective, like I know you said it was a huge thing to get over. How long did that take? That because I mean you can't go cut people open with, well you can, but I mean in your
Yeah.
case you want to be compliant. So what was involved in that process of regulational approval, and how long did that take? Because it's like if you're trying to raise, well, my experience is talking to quite a few medtech founders now, weirdly enough, and everyone's like, shit. Well, if you're going to invest or take on an investor, like the mindset of that type of an investor is very different to someone who's funding a SaaS company. It's a
Right.
long-term payback period. There is regulatory approval, whereas there's no approval in SaaS. You know what I mean? So could you unpack that for us?
Sure. So we worked on the device for a little over about 16 months before we wanted to touch a patient. So there's design development. At first, we're going to the grocery store. We're buying chicken livers and things, and we're cauterizing those. Once we felt like we had a device that functioned, Then we had to do live animal studies. So you do pigs typically. So we did 2 different animal studies. That was to develop the procedure and to see that the device worked, to give us comfort that, okay, we're not causing any issues, we're not hurting anyone, and the thing looks like it works. Once you have that, all that test data and all that preliminary bench data and animal data then goes into submissions to either ethics committees in Europe or IRBs, institutional review boards in the US, and they'll review your protocol, review all your data, and those were both about 6-month processes from the time you approach them before they would let us touch a patient. So this was a year and a half in the making of starting the project before you were touching the first patient. And then this data that we are collecting now, which we will have completed by the end of this month, that is in part is used with the submissions to both the European regulatory authorities and the US FDA to then convince them to give us regulatory approval so we can have the device available commercially. Which again, once we do those submissions, it'll take 3 to 5 months for them to review all our information and then potentially come back and say, okay, you're good to go.
Yeah. If and just by the way, if anyone's curious to know like just how many trials are happening, if you head on over to clinicaltrials.gov, I had this Paul Lammers on the show. He's the founder and CEO of Biosig. They're doing like T-cell cancer therapy, like it's hardcore shit. And there's like over 22,000 cancer trials currently active in the US. It's amazing.
Yeah. Our study is on clinicaltrials.gov as well. So if you go to
Oh, is it there?
clinicaltrials.gov, and you look for single pass, you'll see that the US portion of the study is there. It's being held at Long Beach Memorial.
Very nice.
Yeah, so we're there, so they can see our protocol, what the inclusion exclusion criteria is. Once we have results, we'll start posting them there. So that'll probably in Q1 we'll start posting the results of what happened, and then we'll close that study after it's completed.
Very, very cool. So I want to have a bit of fun with you for a moment. So, yeah. Everybody gets nervous when I say that. It's like, listen,
you're setting me up.
I'm setting you up for an incredible experience. So Bill, I'm going to give you the keys to the Matt Brown Show time machine, and if you could go back to yourself and your founders on day one when you're like, yo, like I think this is an interesting thing or problem to go and solve. Like, what advice would you give yourself about building this business?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I think for the most part, we did everything right again, but just underestimated how big of an impact this could have clinically. I think even though we went forward with this, we were lukewarm about the potential value. And again, we underestimated how valuable this could be. So I think we probably were not thorough enough. Maybe we asked the questions the wrong way. Instead of saying, hey, take a look at this, would you use this? We probably should have come back the other way and said, if we could successfully cauterize these tissue channels so you didn't have bleeding, how valuable would this be to you? And instead of saying, hey, here's a proposed technology that may prevent bleeding, we should have jumped all the way to, let's assume that the technology is going to work. And we would have gotten much different answers from the clinical interviews that we did.
Yeah, I've just got found your press release around the successful initiation of clinical evaluation. It's pretty cool. I do think that, people such as yourselves, founders such as yourselves who are doing like the medical hardware are like at the apex of the pyramid, really, in terms of like acute difficulty.
Yeah, we're at the most stressful part
it's ridiculous.
Of the apex. Yeah,
it's ridiculous. And it's really amazing to see though how like I do believe like without fear there's no courage. You know what I'm saying? And so the fear to solve something like this or anything in medical and hardware, knowing that like you need a specific type of investor, long payback periods, lots of pain, lots of no raise, no product. Basically, that's
they're very high. They're very high risk.
It's so risky, man. It's so risky.
Yeah, we lose some investors we know the targets who have the stomach for this. So those are the seed stage. So that first $1.5 million we collected, those people had to have a lot of trust. And also too, right now, if we have any kind of exit, those guys are going to get a giant return. because the pre-money was so low when they came in, and they took the risk. And if there's an exit, they're going to get paid for that. So they had the guts to step up, knowing could be a long path, could be very risky, could be a high probability it doesn't work out, but their reward will be nice if we can get an exit.
So tell me, what's the vision that you have here? I mean, where do you see this, or how do you see this playing out over the next 12, 24 months, say?
Yeah, I think right now, since we believe we'll have the regulatory approvals late Q1 or by mid Q2, we are already engaged with some strategics who are just waiting for that. We do want to tally up and write a nice clinical report for the data that's coming out, which we will have soon. So I'll wait till after the holidays. We'll start talking to the strategics. I would view right now, for how well things are going, we potentially could have a strategic acquisition in 2023. So we are, but of course we have to plan as if that's not going to happen. So we are collecting enough cash to have a runway. We will hire distribution companies and build a small sales force. We will act as if we have to stay independent, but also plan and approach the strategics to try to get an acquisition. So it wouldn't be unreasonable that in the summertime, once we have good clinical data, because the second we are commercial, the volume of use will be quite high. And we can collect a lot of data and very quickly compare it to the published data to show that the results are significantly improved with a high level of statistical validation. And that should be enough for the strategics to say, okay, they have all the regulatory approvals. All we have to do is sell. They have clinical data that shows that things are improved for the patients and for the hospitals once you use this device. It's easier for them to add to their bag, especially if you're an oncology company, a biopsy company, or even a current electrocautery company.
So I have a question. So let's say that all comes true. Let's say you get a 2023 acquirer, whoop-de-doo, you agree like you're getting the sufficient amount of money out of it, and now it's day one of post-acquisition, there's no earn-out, none of that, you're out. What's your next thing? Do you know what that is? Or do you have a sense as to what that is? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because a lot of founders, this is an important point, so a lot of founders who sell their businesses, the overwhelming majority, like I'm talking like 80-90% of entrepreneurs who sell their businesses go into depression. And I interviewed Bo Burlingham, who wrote the book it's called Finish Big. And he interviewed 300 founders who'd sold their businesses. And it was like 80-90%. And the way that you ensure you don't go into, well, firstly, the why. So why you go into depression typically is because a lot of your sense of meaning and purpose in life as a human, as a man, as a woman, is wrapped up in the struggle. So now you don't have the struggle anymore. You kind of don't have a North Star, no North Star, too much Netflix, too much weed and good food and some sex thrown in, and you'll probably give up on all your dreams. But the entrepreneurs who know or think about post-exit, this is probably what I'm going to go do, and then they sell. Like those are the guys that actually wind up not wasting a year or two of depression, you know what I'm saying? Like, or time being depressed. And I've had this, like I spoke to Ken Londoner. He was one of the first investors in Expedia, put $500,000 into it, and he walked away with 86 million. He was 33 years old. And he went into the worst depression of his life. That's what he was telling me. Like, so, you know what I'm saying? So I'm curious, like, did you have a sense as to like what your next move's going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's already company number 2 and company number 3 right behind this. So I'm on the board of 3 other startup companies, and 2 of them pretty deeply. So they are staged. So one is super, super early, and the other one is a little more advanced. So just there will not be any downtime. So once if there's an acquisition with Single Pass, I will roll right to the company that's right behind it, and escalate that one, escalate the effort on that one, and then again there's another one behind that. So probably at least 2 more after this one before I have to worry about this depression syndrome that you're speaking about.
And then you're done. Then you're just going to enjoy the good life in California.
Well, I don't think I'll ever be done. You know, I threatened that with my wife, and she says there's no way you'll be happy unless you're crazy busy. So
Mm.
I'll probably never totally get out of it and have some level. But probably after the next two, I'd like to take it down a significant notch, but I'll never not be involved.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a finish line for us, you know.
Right. Yeah. We have that personality type. Type A analytical driver. There's no finish line.
No, it's imaginary. And anyone who thinks like, oh, I don't know, I really don't. I've put a video out on YouTube about this because I was like, there's no, even when you sell, like, there's got to be a next thing. You either go into depression or you go build another business. You know what I'm saying? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Sit around? Even if you were rich, like, I mean, I can't think of a worse use of time than sitting around.
Yeah.
Y-
I wouldn't know what that's like. So it was years ago. I decided to run a marathon and train and train and train and ran that marathon and then had instant depression afterwards because I no longer had a goal.
there you
So
go.
ended up running 5 marathons in that year, and then had like, okay, that's leaving me unfulfilled. So then I switched to triathlons and ended up doing Ironman triathlons because again, there always needed to be the goal and the carrot to keep me being driven. So it's same for business, you know, the other two that are lined up right behind this. But in the meantime, I get outreach for more. So inevitably, somebody else will hit me up with a good idea that I
Mm.
think is something I should dig into. But so right now, two in the parking lot, but I've got to get this one to the finish line.
Awesome. Well, look, Bill, it's been a real privilege having you here, man. I really hope. Well, in fact, you know what? If and when you hit that acquisition thing, please reach out to me again and let me
Okay.
know, and then you can come back and we can update and we can talk about like what led up to it. How did you decide what was enough? You know what I mean? Like, what were the terms against and you can share how much you can, I'm probably under NDA or something, but and then like post acquisition, like what are your plans, that kind of thing. I think that would be quite a cool show.
That'd be great. Yeah, I hope I can come back in 2023 and give you the details.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right.
Ciao.
Thanks, Matt.